Welcome to the 2020 Candidates Debate, moderated by the Nonpartisan League of Women Voters of New Canaan. We're grateful to Town Hall for allowing us to use this space for the debates, and to New Canaan Public Access, Channel 79, for their production and live stream. We are live streaming tonight on Channel 79, on 79's YouTube channel, and also on our League of Women Voters of New Canaan Facebook page. A reminder that the recording of tonight's program is the property of the League, and edited or partial usage is not permitted. This has been a very tough year for nearly everything, and that includes campaigning. Candidates, we thank you for running. And those of you watching at home, we encourage you to consult the Nonpartisan Voters Guide on our website for more information on these candidates and also for answers to all your voting questions. Go to our website, lwvnewcanaan.org. For all of our health and safety, our town's health department has asked that those of us here tonight wear our masks at all times, no exceptions. Candidates and moderator will do their very best to speak clearly and directly into the microphone, and we hope that the live captions at the base of your screens will help make this program more easily and widely accessible. Questions for tonight were solicited from the public in advance. Following the League's nonpartisan guidelines, our team screens and rewrites questions for comprehensiveness, neutrality, applicability to both candidates, and appropriateness to the office in question. You, the electorate, are interested in a broad range of issues, and we have tried to address as many as possible here tonight. Candidates have agreed in writing to our many debate rules, some of which include sticking to the time limits, answering the question being asked, and doing so truthfully and factually. And finally, I've said it before and I will say it again, this annual debate is a forum for fair, constructive, and robust inquiry. We are very excited to have a thoughtful exchange of ideas because together, like it or sometimes not, we are democracy in action. So please, let's remember that, and all of us, here and at home, rise to our better selves. Our moderator tonight is Yara Burnett, who comes to us from the Greenwich League. She is a 42-year member of the League of Women Voters and is an experienced moderator who has served the League and her own municipal government broadly and with distinction. We are lucky to have her here with us tonight, and welcome Yara Burnett.
Good evening, everybody, and thank you, Mickey, for this lovely introduction. Don't know that I deserve it necessarily. Before we begin, just a few words about the format. Some of it has already been covered. If I cover it again, my apologies. There will be 2 consecutive debates featuring candidates for State Assembly District 142, followed by a simultaneous debate for the candidates for the Senate Districts 26 and 36, respectively. Candidates will be seated next to each other with some distancing and will address their comments to their opponents only. The debates are being conducted without a live audience, but as you've heard before, are being transmitted to viewers on Channel 79, through YouTube, and through the League of Women Voters New Canaan Facebook page. A printable copy of tonight's program can be found on the League of Women Voters of New Canaan website. A timed response format will be used throughout. Each candidate will have 90 seconds to answer each question, with a possibility of a 30-second rebuttal if desired. Questions have been submitted previously and nobody has seen them. I have just opened the envelope tonight upon coming here, right here. At the conclusion of each segment, each candidate will have a 1-minute closing statement. All candidates have agreed in writing to the rules for this debate. We are now ready to begin. Timers, are you ready?
Excuse me, is it 2-minute closing statement?
No, 1 minute, I was told.
Let's
2
do
minutes, all right, let's do 2 minutes.
2 minutes.
I beg your pardon, 2-minute closing statements. Timers, are you ready? I will now introduce the candidates for the 142nd Assembly District. Now, to my right is Miss Latham. Am I pronouncing your name right?
It's Lucy Dathan.
Dathan, I apologize.
Dathan. It's like Nathan, but begins
Yeah,
with
I
a D.
apologize.
That's all right.
It's Lucy Dathan, and sitting next to her is Mr. Wilms. Mr. Wilms has won the toss and will present his opening statement first. Go ahead,
Well,
please. 1 minute.
Good evening, and thank you to the League of Women Voters for sponsoring this, and also to my opponent, Lucy. Regardless of how you feel about national politics, Connecticut issues have a separate dynamic. Our state is controlled by legislators from Bridgeport, New Haven, and Hartford, and those affiliated with the state employee unions. And their policies and interests are the complete opposite of New Canaan's. There's 4 main areas that I'd like to focus on tonight. First is the New Canaan taxpayers. Hartford recently just raised taxes by $1.7 billion, and any tax increases unfortunately hit New Canaan disproportionately hard. Secondly, the police. I'm a strong supporter of the New Canaan police and restoring qualified immunity. Thirdly, with regards to the schools, I believe we should have New Canaan control over the schools, and I oppose all regionalization attempts. And then finally, in the area of zoning and neighborhood protection, again, we need to have local control over that, and I do not support any bills to have the state have any override capability.
Thank you, Ms. Dathan. Your opening statement?
Thank you to the League of Women Voters for organizing this debate and advocating for more civic engagement, especially as we celebrate the centennial of the women's right to vote. Thank you to the co-sponsors and the moderator, and thank you to Fred for your participation and all the viewers at home. Local elections are so important as they truly affect our day-to-day lives. I am so proud to have represented you for the last 2 years. And in my 25-year finance experience as a CPA, investment banker, and most recently as a CFO of technology companies, helping them think long-term and strategically with their budgeting and business planning. Connecticut is at a crossroads. We have a number of fiscal challenges ahead of us due to the pandemic, and we need a comprehensive and stable vision for our future. I will continue to bring my expertise to the Appropriations Committee. During my first term as Vice Chair of the Insurance and Real Estate Committee, I have dedicated to improving Connecticut's residents to accessibility of health care.
I thank you. And we are going to questions now. And Ms. Dathan, you will be answering the question first. Even though public transportation usage has declined post-COVID, it will continue to be an important element of our town and state's economic health. Connecticut recently received a $400,000 federal grant to study transportation funding. What transportation options or improvements do you foresee, and what are the potential sources of funding for those improvements? Again, I'm happy to repeat the question. 2 minutes. I'm sorry, 90 seconds.
Thank you. So I am very supportive of improving our transportation. Transportation is one of the key inhibitors for us growing businesses here in our state. It is an inhibitor for businesses and people wanting to come to our state. We need to ensure that we are smart in our transportation. We're looking at a multimodal form of transportation that's focusing not just on roads, but rails, also looking at our seaports as well as our air and aviation. Our current roads are average age of 55 years. We have bridges that are over 62% are over 48 years old. 5 Metro North bridges are over 100 years old. All of this is causing delays on all of our transport. It is very much time for us to reinvest and look at it. I'm supporting the toll program, which would pay a user fee for people who are using our roads, our highways, and looking at some of the major highways, focusing on 95, 91, and not the Merritt Parkway though, but really focusing on the users who are using the roads. I think that the status quo is not an option, and we need to be looking ahead to making new adjustments. And in terms of our rails, I'm looking here, I've been a proud advocate for behalf of New Canaan for a passing lane on the branch line.
Thank you very much. Mr. Wilms, your response, please, in 90 seconds.
Yes. There's a special transportation fund that's been in existence for many years, and that's supposed to be used to fund our many transportation projects, whether it's roads or bridges or Metro North or the airports or any form of transportation. Unfortunately, it's been continually raided. I was privileged to serve as your state representative for 4 years, from 2015 to 19, and in my last term, I took the lead in getting the car sales tax transferred to the transportation fund, and the then DOT commissioner said, you know, if you do that, that's going to fully fund the transportation fund for the next 5 years, and that would cover whatever needs we had during that period of time. Unfortunately, what happened is the current administration and my opponent voted to divert those funds away and back to the general operating fund. So that's very, very unfortunate. You know, with regards to tolls, here's the question. Do you believe that that money will be used for transportation? Because I think if we did, that would be one separate conversation. But unfortunately, the track record year after year after year has been that that money gets diverted to the general operating fund for general budgetary purposes. And so if that's the case, it's just a new tax. It's just a new levy that's not going to what it was designed to be used for.
All right. Is there anything you'd like to add?
Yes, please.
Thank you. 30 seconds.
So this is a myth. This is false information. The STF has only been rated one time, and that's in 2003. And I have a chart here that was produced by the Nonpartisan Office of Fiscal Analysis indicating that. I have not voted to raid the fund. I did a survey in my district, and 80% of the respondents said that they are supporting that people who use the roads should be paying for them, and that means they're supporting tolls.
Thank you. Mr. Wilms, do you have anything to add?
Yes, the fact is that the current budget did take money that was scheduled to go to the transportation fund, and there were increases that were scheduled to go there, and they were diverted away. So that's simply a fact. Secondly, what the proponents of tolls don't mention is how many gantries there are going to be. Originally, there were over 100. Now it's been reduced, I think, to 50. So again, what it comes down to with tolls is, will the money be used for transportation? What guarantees exist that that will be the case? Thank you.
Okay, let's switch gears. This question goes to you, Mr. Wilms. Last spring, a school regionalization bill was proposed, and now a bill has been raised regarding affordable housing. What do you think should be the state's role regarding school regionalization and planning and zoning of affordable housing in local municipality? So school regionalization and planning and zoning for affordable housing.
Well, I really appreciate that question because that touches upon 2 points that I raised in my opening statement. I really believe that New Canaan and every town should have control over their own school system. And it's not clear to me what the purpose of regionalizing and taking away New Canaan control. I think New Canaan has the best ability to manage its own school system, and quite frankly, New Canaan has done an outstanding job managing its own school system. So I'm trying to understand what the purpose of regionalizing schools is exactly. Secondly, with regards to the zoning, when I served in the legislature, then Governor Malloy proposed these transit-oriented districts where essentially the state would have override capacity over for any land within 5 miles of a Metro North train station. So if you take the New Canaan train station and you go 5 miles in any direction, that's a lot of New Canaan. Certainly also the same applies to Norwalk, where I'm from. And thankfully we defeated that bill. The new bills that I'm seeing are the Malloy bill on steroids. Where essentially they're trying to cram affordable housing into areas where it doesn't belong. It becomes spot zoning. There is an affordable housing statute, 830G, And, that has been serving a very good purpose. In Norwalk, we've always been over 10%, which is the required threshold. And I know New Canaan has been working to put in new affordable housing. And my approach has always been for communities like New Canaan that are moving in the right direction, they should be rewarded.
Thank you very much, Ms. Dathan. Dathan?
Thank you. I fully agree with my opponent here. I stood strong against my party, strong against my leaders in my party to stand up against regionalization. I did analysis to show that it didn't make financial sense. I also agree with his stance on zoning. I believe that New Canaan should have the control over regulations. So again, if a bill would to come up, I would stand strong against my party and my leadership again. New Canaan, we are very lucky. We have a lot of different developments. We have the mill apartments. I've been involved with the project and the discussing of the expansion of Canaan Parish. I have worked with the housing commissioner, and I look forward to supporting that project as it comes to fruition. All of these are under the 830G, as my opponent spoke about, and I fully agree that those policies are the right policies. I did want to go back to tolls, and I wanted to re-discuss that, we shouldn't be funding for people from New York to get to the Cape. We should be ensuring that we pay for our roads in a responsible manner. And the more gantries you have, the less price point that each gantry would be. So whilst, we're talking about several gantries, the cost per mile would still be about 4 cents to Connecticut residents.
Thank you. Anything to add on the regionalization or zoning?
Yes, I would. Lucy voted with her party, the Hartford Democrats, 97% of the time in 2019. And so apparently you voted against them on 3% of the occasion. And I'm glad to hear that both of the regionalization proposals would fall into that 3% category. Finally, again, with tolls, the question is, what guarantee is there that the money that's raised by tolls will be used to pay for transportation projects? That's the question I'm asking.
Okay. Yes, on the regionalization and...
Yes. Again, I stood up against my party. I did an analysis to prove that it didn't make sense. And yes, 90% of all of the work we do in Hartford is done on a bipartisan basis. And 95% of the bills are done with, some support of both parties. So in a sense, I voted more times against my own party than with my own party when it came to the differentials.
Thank you very much. We're ready for another question, and it will go to you first, Ms. Dathan. The Affordable Care Act is in litigation right now before Supreme Court. What are your legislative priorities for health care coverage in Connecticut, depending on the outcome?
Well, we could have a huge debate over this because this is probably one of the things I'm most passionate about. With the Affordable Care Act under siege by the federal government, it is more concerning now, especially during a pandemic, that we ensure that everyone has access to affordable health care. I am vice chair of the Insurance and Real Estate Committee. Very lucky to be a vice chairman so early in my tenure. But I have been supporting measures to ensure that we can have affordable health care. I have been champion on ensuring that our pre-existing conditions remained in statute. I codified them into law. I also sponsored bills around and championed bills around telemedicine to ensure that telemedicine could continue during the pandemic. I also looked at capping the cost of insulin, but more importantly, one of the things I feel that most proudly about is my working on the public option health care. I believe that we need to have an alternative to regular health insurance because not everybody can get private health care through their work. So it gives people another option to be able to use the state's insurance and be able to buy into it at no cost to taxpayers, that they would be able to get a affordable health care plan that would be about 20% less than ACA plans.
Thank you very much, Mr. Wilms.
Yeah, healthcare is a very important issue, especially with the pandemic, and I agree with Lucy on that. Well, first of all, with regards to the Affordable Care Act, many of those provisions have been voted into state statute already. And actually, I voted for many of them when I served in the legislature. I also supported the Medicare Savings Program, which helps seniors pay for their Medicare deductibles and premiums. We have the Medicaid expansion that we implemented here in Connecticut under the ACA. Also, I co-sponsored a bill to expand telehealth. I think that is a very important issue. I agree with Lucy about the insulin capping. The other thing that I found interesting is that one of the first things that Governor Lamont, one of the provisions he suspended was the certificate of need for new hospitals and healthcare facilities. And I think we should make that permanent. We're one of the few states that actually requires that, and I think it inhibits the supply of medicine and healthcare. And I'd like to see that made. Like to see that made permanent. Anything that we can do to create more options, more supply for our citizens is only to the best when it comes to healthcare.
Thank you. Is there anything to add?
Yes, I'd like to add something. So my opponent says he supports healthcare, but he voted in 2018 session on LCO 4279, which would take away pre-existing conditions and also would make healthcare more affordable, more expensive for families that are getting healthcare. We also need to ensure that we expand it, especially during a pandemic.
Okay, more to say?
I've always supported pre-existing conditions. My father was a disabled veteran, and I remember as a boy growing up that he couldn't get insurance because he was a disabled veteran, and it was something that affected our family right from the very beginning. I've always supported pre-existing conditions.
All right, switching gears, this question goes to you first, Mr. Wilms. A significant portion of Connecticut's budget goes to debt service and salaries, pension obligations, and benefits for public union employees. What could the legislature do to control these costs and put Connecticut's cost structure more in line with neighboring states?
Well, that's really the key question when it comes to our state finances. Employee compensation is over 40% of the entire state budget. And when I chaired the Board of Finance in Norwalk, we renegotiated all the union contracts. You have to renegotiate the contracts. And next year, the wage contracts are coming up for the various state employee unions. What you need to do is you need to put new employees on essentially 401ks, defined contribution plans. You need to get rid of the post-retirement health care for new employees, and also make health care reform. And also, it's been shown that the state employees get compensation that's about 20 or 25% greater than what they would earn in the private sector. So really what it comes down to is having political will to renegotiate and make structural changes to the union contracts and to the state finances. And that's something that I did on the city level for 8 years. And in 2017, I was a key member because of my strong finance background, both in government finance and also in banking. I was one of the leading members on the Appropriations Committee and for the Republican caucus. We passed in Connecticut for the first time in over 30 years the Republican budget that had no tax increases and built up the rainy day fund and inputted the constitutional spending cap. These kind of structural changes can happen, and I show that I have the skill set to make that the case.
Thank you. Ms. Latham?
I hear and echo your concerns that this debt has caused, but Fred, I have to question your level of commitment. The day after you lost the election in 2018, you chose to resign your seat on the Pension Sustainability Commission. This appointed seat, which was not tied to your role as an elected representative. Connecticut does not need quitters. And in the 142nd District needs a representative that shows commitment to solve the problems that really matter to our state. As Fred stated, 50% of our state budget is going to fixed costs. That has grown, that's doubled in nearly 12 years. More and more of that is going every year, that is growing. While in the same 12-year period, our variable expenses, or the things that aren't dependent on any debt servicing and other obligations, have decreased. So it is very important that we look at everything. I am looking forward to the next session where we are going to be digging into the mitigation plan. Connecticut is facing a $2 billion deficit in the fiscal year 21, and it is absolutely essential that we have people who can think long-term and strategically to get us out of this mess, and people that don't quit.
Thank you, sir. Anything to add?
You know, that's a backhanded compliment. I was the only Republican selected to be on that Pension Sustainability Commission. And after the election, where all of the Republicans here lost, and we lost our voting capability in Hartford, it turns out that that commission produced absolutely none of the recommendations that we were working on, because the political dynamic had changed. The Democrats took control in Hartford, and they had no interest in making any of those kind of reforms. Quite frankly, Lucy, you've been endorsed by the Working Families Party, which to me is a huge red flag, because they are the creatures of the state employee unions. And
I think that was time.
Is that time?
oh, okay, I saw 60.
Okay, Lucy? I'm sorry, Ms. Latham.
Okay.
Would you have anything to add?
Yes. Well, so the commission was just at the crux of coming up with final solutions when Fred decided to quit. And my feeling is we need people who are going to be dedicated to solving the state's problems, dedicated to having their voices heard, and dedicated to being sure that they are representative of their district. My feeling is we can't have people that aren't fully committed to this role.
All right, thank you very much. We'll try another topic. Ms. Latham, you're first. Discussions about racial justice and poverty are taking place across the country, state, and also in New Canaan. How do you view racial justice and poverty levels in Fairfield County, and what policy areas do you feel will need legislative action, if any?
It's a great question. I see a couple different areas where we need to have more justice for people. We did speak a little bit about healthcare as the first area where I believe that people need to be able to buy their health insurance at a reasonable price that isn't going to put them into debt. We need to ensure that housing is fair, and people also don't go up with a lot of expenses for their housing, so they need to be green and sustainable with not a lot of extra expenses. And the last area where I think we need to look about justice and equity there is in environmental justice. Too many parts of our state have areas that are brownfields and other places that definitely need to have some investment and love put into them so that they can grow and be good. But we also need to make sure that people have their say and there is adequate hearings over this. We need to ensure that people have access to fresh water, to fresh air, and all of the other things to keep them healthy. But most of all, I feel healthcare is the most important thing.
Thank you, Mr. Wilms.
Yeah, could you repeat the question, please?
Absolutely. It's a long one. Hold on, I had turned the page already. All right. Discussions about racial justice and poverty are taking place across the country, state, and in New Canaan. How do you view racial justice and poverty levels in Fairfield County, and what policy areas do you feel will need legislative action, if any?
Well, that's an important question. It's something that we, as a country, have been struggling with for much of this year. Certainly, clearly, we have a lot more work that we need to do, and in our entire history, we've always had to, and I think we need to redouble our efforts to make sure that there's equal opportunities for all. My approach is that for those who don't have the opportunities that others have, we need to look to expand those circles. One area that I've been a huge supporter of are charter schools. Charter schools are public schools that are state-funded and state-chartered, and they provide opportunities to kids who maybe wouldn't be getting it otherwise. There's some wonderful charter schools. For example, there's the Amistad Academy in New Haven, and it's 98% African American and Hispanic, and there's huge waiting lists to get into that school. There's a charter school in Norwalk, for example, in South Norwalk. There's also inter-district regional schools and magnet schools. So I'm a big supporter of reducing the caps that the state has imposed on the number of charter schools in the state. Also, the funding restrictions that the state has imposed, mostly because of pressure from the teachers' unions. And then finally, I work with small businesses in my banking job, and I'm a big believer that we need to do further outreach for minority-owned businesses so that more wealth and more opportunities are created.
Thank you. Is there more to be said, Ms. Dathan?
I'll just add on that I actually oppose the charter schools. It sounds like a Betsy DeVos plan that we're trying to put into Connecticut. My feeling is it takes away funding from our regular schools. We need to ensure that our schools are well-funded, whether they're magnet or they are other normal schools. So I will continue to fund the ECS formula and make sure that we get there, and make sure that we are also funding ELL programs in our area.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Wilms. Anything else to add to this?
No, I just think that charter schools they were around long before Betsy DeVos became a secretary. They've been around for decades. The charter school in Norwalk has been there for over 20 years. And I've met many of the kids. I know many of the kids. I went to the Amistad Academy. There's a charter school in Bridgeport. And you know what? The parents are excited. There's waiting lists and queues to get into the school. And they desperately want their kids to get those opportunities. And I for one, believe that we really need to reach out there.
Thank you very much. Now, the next question goes to you again, Mr. Wilms. New Canaan has experienced water shortages, prolonged power outages, and limited access to natural gas. While new legislation just passed to enhance consumer protection for utility customers, what additional long-term solutions would you advance to improve our energy and resource infrastructure?
Well, that's an important question. I agree with what many of the reforms that were passed. What Eversource, the way they didn't step up, the way they didn't respond during the last storm was just completely unacceptable. And as far as I'm concerned, I think the CEO should have resigned because of just the extremely poor performance. I like the new metric system in terms of how they're regulated and evaluated, and I think there needs to be more of a focus on how Eversource handles ratepayers or customers as opposed to ratepayers and shareholders. I'm also a big believer in diversifying our energy sources. First, I'm excited about the wind project, wind turbine project on Long Island Sound. I think that can provide some low-cost energy, and also it's renewable. I've also been a huge supporter of solar. I've also been a big proponent of electric cars. A few years ago, I tried to get Tesla to be allowed to be sold in Connecticut. It was illegal to buy a Tesla car, electric car in Connecticut. I thought that's just ridiculous. And so I'm going to continue to support alternative energies, alternative approaches, and as far as Eversource and United Illuminating, they need to be held accountable and responsive to us as consumers.
Thank you very much, Ms. Layton.
I was a very proud supporter of our bill that we did in the September special session to hold Eversource accountable. It was one of my toughest constituent helping situations. For several weeks, I've been helping New Canaan residents with trying to get their power restored. I had very fragile medically fragile people. I had pregnant women, newborn babies, elderly people. One of my constituents actually fell because of the lack of power. It was unacceptable that they had such a bad experience, and it was so bad that Eversource did not do their jobs. I was proud to have regular conversations. But it doesn't stop at Eversource. We also have issues with our local cable companies. I know so many New Canaan residents are really suffering at the hands of not having good internet access. And we've seen it, especially during this COVID experience, where many of us are working from home. Many of us have children who are doing remote schoolwork. We need reliable service. It's very important. Lastly, I am supportive of alternative energy sources, looking at solar, wind, and other sources. And my view is we need to take away the monopoly of Eversource in our state, and we need to ensure folks have extra choices.
Thank you very much. Mr. Wilms, anything to add?
No, I don't.
Okay. Ms. Latham? No. All right, final question coming up, and it will go to you, Ms. Latham. Sorry, I will get it. I'm having a hard time with
Don't
this.
worry.
There are many factors that make a state attractive to businesses: abundant talent pool, taxes, transportation, regulation. What ideas do you have to attract businesses that will put down roots and stay in Connecticut past COVID?
That is a great question, and I am very kind of hit it from the transportation point of view, because we saw in our last report by Moody's, a famous credit rating agency, that we actually were given a very favorable rating, and it was due to the amount of money we've saved in our $3 billion rainy day fund that will help us get through this COVID crisis. But we need to figure out, one of the problems that Moody's said is without the ability to get people around in our state will not be able to grow. Businesses will not want to move to Connecticut if they can't get their employees around. Small businesses that are reliant on servicing customers can't afford time wasted on 95 and the Merritt Parkway trying to service their customers. People need to get around, and we need to have good transportation for that. We also need to ensure that we are training our workers of tomorrow in advanced manufacturing jobs, and I've been very supportive of efforts like this. I've been very supportive of the Angel Investor Tax Credit, which is going to help businesses start up here in our state. With my corporate finance background, that is a key component for wanting to get businesses up and going. So thank you.
Mr. Wilms?
Yeah, well, the first thing we need to do is get our state finances in order. Companies don't want to move to a state that has a $1 to $2 billion structural deficit every single year. Worried about, well, what new taxes are going to be raised or implemented. So that's the first thing we need to do, is get that in place. And in 2017, I was part of the group that was able to produce the Republican budget, which became the bipartisan budget that did not raise taxes, built up the rainy day fund that Lucy referred to, that's now going to go up to $3 billion. Secondly, we need to have our tax structure attractive for businesses. Essentially, what we need to do is just look good relative to our neighbors, in particular New York and Massachusetts. And so we need to ensure that our tax structure is competitive relative to our two neighbors. We also need to work on regulations. Our small businesses are burdened with so many regulations. And also, they're just really not treated as friends. Small business owners tell me all the time that when it comes to unemployment compensation issues or workers' compensation issues, they're always getting the short stick. And it really, for some businesses, the final straw for them to leave our state. Back in the late 80s, businesses came here because they wanted to. We didn't have to bribe them. We didn't have to give them packages. They just came here. And so we know what we need to do is restore what we had just 30 years ago.
Thank you very much. Anything else to add?
Yes, please. So the GOP budget, it claims that there's no increase on tax, but actually there was $1.5 billion of new revenue in taxes. It increased property taxes on cars by an elimination of the motor vehicle tax, or motor vehicle mill rate cap. It also increased business taxes, eliminated the angel investor tax credit, which will incentivize new businesses, and it eliminates the tax deduction for utilities. Plus, that was a hard hit on education.
Okay, Mr. Wilms, final word?
The budget that Lucy voted for just last year raised taxes by $1.7 billion. And, what really disappointed me was there was really no attempt made by the governor or by the Democrats in Hartford to try to achieve cost savings or any kind of structural changes. They just went right for the tax increase. And unfortunately, that's now the third one that we've had in 10 years. And we've had 3 major tax increases, and what do we have? We still have $1 to $2 billion structural deficits.
Thank you very much. This finishes the questions. We are now going to go to closing statements. And Mr. Wilms, you go first. 2 minutes.
Yes, once again, thank you to the League of Women Voters, and thank you, Lucy. 2020, this has been one heck of a year. We live in turbulent times, and I think now more than ever, we need legislators who maybe take a more thoughtful, maybe a more calm, maybe approach that looks to bring people together. We've had enough of the bickering, we've had enough of the divisiveness and the partisanship, and I think people just want people who can reach out to others and fix problems and solve things. There's 2 examples in my public service history that I'll just point to. For 8 years, I chaired the Board of Investment Taxation for the City of Norwalk, which is the finance board. 4 Republicans, 3 Democrats. Most of that time was during the Great Recession, when things were very volatile. We produced 8 city budgets, all approved unanimously. Secondly, when I was in the legislature, I teamed up with State Representative Bruce Morris, a legislator from South Norwalk. And together, he and we co-sponsored a bipartisan bill that for the first time in decades changed the ECS formula to bring more money to the schools. And I did that by reaching across the aisle. He and we testified together, we worked together, and that's the kind of approach that I think we need and that I'll continue to bring if you bring me back to Hartford.
Thank you very much. Your turn, ma'am.
Maya Angelou told us wisely, when somebody shows you who they are, believe them the first time. We need to remember that in here. I commend anyone who steps forward for public service, but Mr. Wilms has already shown us that he is not an effective legislator. He hasn't represented his constituents. He has repeatedly told us what he's against and what he's for. He has not brought us more funding to the schools, and he walked away from his appointment to solve the pension and financial challenges of our state. I have been working for you, my constituents in the 142nd District, through COVID, through issues with Eversource, through issues with cable and other problems that you've had. I have also helped face issues faced you in the last 2 years. I have built a sustainable strategic budget without raising the income tax, without raising taxes on capital gains. I have fought for lowering the cost of health care. I have worked to keep you informed and helping our community during this pandemic, and I'm ensuring that our schools are well funded. And these are all priorities I hope to return to in 2021 and fight for maintaining local control over our schools and zoning and modernizing our transportation. I ask respectively tonight for your vote on November 3rd or at your home on your absentee ballot.
Thank you very much, candidates. Appreciate. It was wonderful being here with you, and please don't forget to vote.
Great.
This concludes this segment, and we will be going to the senatorial debate. Thank you. evening, and welcome to the second segment of this debate, the senatorial debate. By the draw of the straw, the Senatorial District 36 will go first. District 26 will go second. We will start with a minute opening statement. The first, we will start with Mr. Fazio, go down, and then the first question afterwards will go to Ms. Kasser, and we will rotate being first. It's going to be a little bit different because we want to have each district go first at different times. Mr. Fazio, are you ready?
I am.
Okay. 1 minute opening statement, please.
Thank you to the League of Women Voters for organizing tonight's debate, my opponent for joining, and our friend from the 26th District. My name's Ryan Fazio. I'm running for State Senate this year in order to give the people of New Canaan and the entire 36th District a state government that's equal to the full caliber of our community. Over the last 12 years, the state government in Hartford has raised taxes by billions of dollars on the middle class 4 separate times, to the point that our state is the second highest taxed in the entire country. Because of that, we're one of just 2 states in the entire country never to recover from the last recession before this one began. And now, to boot, the state government is trying to take over local control of our planning and zoning, as well as regionalize our school districts. That's just not acceptable to me. I'm running because it's time for a change in our state government. Let's lower taxes, protect local control, and preserve the public safety for all our residents.
Thank you, Mr. Fazio. Ms. Gasser?
Thank you to the League and everyone watching from home. Yesterday, I met with Girl Scouts, ages 5 to 17, who were so excited to meet a woman senator. And that experience reminded me that as elected officials, we do more than discuss policy and vote on bills. We are role models. I got into this to show young people, like those Girl Scouts, what politics can be, standing up for truth and standing up for others. We can do hard things. We can use our voice to fight for what we believe is right. We will be attacked and bullied because that's what some people do to win, but we will never stoop to that. Principles are more important. So when someone spreads lies about you or criticizes how you look or who you love, remember, we're better than that. We're strong, we're brave, we determine our lives, and we'll determine the future.
Thank you, Ms. Healy.
Yes, thank you to the New Canaan League of Women Voters and to everyone watching, to everyone here. I'm really glad to be here with you. My name is Kim Healy. I am a New York native. My husband and I bought our first home in Connecticut in 1994, and we moved to Wilton in 2008. I am a wife, a mom of 4 wonderful children, ages 23 to 14, with 2 dogs and a cat. I am a CPA, a trained accountant, and my professional background includes being an auditor with PricewaterhouseCoopers in the New York and Stamford offices. I am currently the treasurer of the board of the Wilton Library, where I have been for the past 5 years. I have been honored to serve my community in this role. I am also a volunteer tax preparer through the AARP, where we serve retired and low-income individuals and families from Connecticut and surrounding New York areas. I believe that we need to keep our decisions local. Each town and city is unique in our state, and so are their needs. We should keep in mind that when writing laws and regulations, I am running because I care deeply about our community and the future of our state.
Thank you very much. Sir? Mr. Haskell.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you to the League for putting this together under such difficult circumstances. My name is Will Haskell, and I have the honor of representing the 26th District. Some of you may remember 2 years ago I decided to do something a little bit unusual. I decided to come home to Connecticut and to run for office, and so many of you took a chance on me in living rooms and on front doorsteps. We shared our frustration, not just about the state of our state, but also about the state of our politics. And as I go door to door, I'd be remiss not to mention that time and time again, voters are focused not just on what's happening in Connecticut, but of course the critical juncture that we are facing in terms of who we send to Washington. Inevitably, what happens in D.C. impacts us here in Connecticut. When Donald Trump tried to defund Planned Parenthood, Connecticut had to be the first line of defense in making sure that in this state, reproductive health care is health care. And while Washington floundered and flailed in the wake of an unprecedented pandemic, Connecticut stepped up to the plate, setting a national model in terms of containment. I want to continue that hard work of making this community that much better. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the opening statements. We'll go to questions now. The first one will go to Ms. Kasser. Then Mr. Fazio, you will make your statement, rebut, and then we'll go to you. Okay? Question 1 is, New Canaan has experienced water shortages, prolonged power outages, and limited access to natural gas. While new legislation just passed to enhance consumer protection for utility customers, what additional long-term solutions would you advance to improve our energy and resource infrastructure?
Thank you for that question. I have been a lifelong environmental advocate, and before I ran for office, I was getting a PhD in environmental law and policy, so this area is my passion. I also believe in science, and I believe that climate change is real. So if you share those views and you understand that we need to take action, doing nothing is not an option. And in the Senate, I have taken significant action. I passed a bill to allow more environmental infrastructure projects, solar, electric charging stations, and we passed a significant law that creates more wind energy in Connecticut, 2,000 megawatts of wind over 10 years. Now, what else can we do? We can do a lot more. I am proud that I supported the Take Back Our Grid Act. It begins to reshape the dynamics so that our public utilities will be accountable to the public, to their consumers. But it's just a first step. We need to do a lot more. I'm also proud that I helped pass the state water plan, because up until last year, our state did not have a water plan, so we could not regulate the quantity of water, and which, as we know, is significant in the era of climate change, and the fact that we're having a drought right now that most people don't even know about. There are a lot of things that we can do better. I just want to say that my opponent is for more nuclear and hydropower energy, which are not the solutions. They're not renewable, they're not safe, and we need a long-term strategy.
Thank you very much. Mr. Fazio, your answer?
Thank you. That final comment puts my opponent at odds with her own national party, which included nuclear power in its party platform this year, because they understand that in order to reduce emissions and provide clean energy in an affordable and reliable way, that we need an all-of-the-above clean energy strategy. That's what I hope to introduce in the state Senate. Bring in more types of clean energy to our grid, including imported nuclear power, no new nuclear power, but imported, hydroelectric, and so on and so forth, putting all forms of energy on an equal playing field. We have to have a competitive open bid process for energy generation. No long-term contracts negotiated behind closed doors, closing out the public's input. We need to hold Eversource accountable, and we need to limit Eversource's monopoly, which has expanded vertically over recent years. Finally, we need good infrastructure in our state, and to reduce onerous rules on building and renovating our infrastructure so we can do it more effectively and more cheaply, including by changing laws such as project labor agreements and prevailing wage rules, which make it really difficult to provide high-quality infrastructure to our people. We have the second highest electricity rates in the entire country in Connecticut. That's a regressive tax on middle-class and working-class people. We can do better, but we need to bring change.
Thank you very much. Ms. Kasser, is there anything to add?
Oh, yes, definitely. My opponent has said that burying power lines is too expensive. He has just said, reaffirmed, that he wants to eliminate agreements that set safety and quality standards for our infrastructure. Now, if you think that cutting corners by cutting costs and skimping on safety is a good idea when we rebuild our infrastructure, then we have a fundamental disagreement. We actually bid out the wind energy project and got the lowest cost in the country. So yes, we can do a lot more to make our power grid resilient, but we need a long-term strategy.
Thank you very much, Mr. Fazio.
Yes, just quickly. First of all, burying power lines is about a mile per power line buried. So if you were to do that for just a quarter of the state, across the state, it would cost tens of thousands of dollars per family. We could do it in concentrated ways, but we can't do it in a large-scale manner. Other states across the country have above-ground power lines, but those hit by Isaias got their power online far quicker than Connecticut did. There are other failures at foot. The state government is not doing a good job. It's time for a change.
Thank you very much. The same question now goes to District 26. Would you like me to reread it? Mr. Haskell, you're first.
No, I don't think so. I'm okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Good.
Let me just say I'm really proud to sit on the Environment Committee in Hartford, proud to have a 100% rating from the Connecticut League of Conservation Voters, and proud to be endorsed by the Sierra Club. Let me dig into the details because we've referenced the Take Back Our Grid Act, but I want to actually talk about what it did for those who didn't have time to read the bill. First of all, this should have been done decades ago, but it shifted Connecticut to a performance-based regulatory structure. So now when Eversource comes to PURA, the Public Utilities Regulatory Authority, PURA will be able to look at things like, are they investing in sustainability? Are they staffing up in preparation for the next storm? How much are they paying their CEO? But last year it was $19 million. We've got a grid that is neither affordable nor reliable. And of course, we can't blame Eversource for the weather. We live in New England, but this storm announced itself 5 days in advance in the Southern Caribbean. So finally, we held Eversource accountable by passing the Take Back Our Grid Act. And by the way, it creates a financial incentive to do better because it mandates reimbursements. If you're without power more than 96 hours after a storm, you're going to be reimbursed for lost food and medication. Of course, the bill didn't go far enough. It didn't include increasing the mandate for renewable energy. I co-sponsored and helped pass the Connecticut Green New Deal, not the Washington Green New Deal, which is probably not all that achievable, but the Connecticut Green New Deal, which dramatically increases our reliance on renewables, not just because that's good environmental policy, but because, as Senator Kasser mentioned, it is good economic policy. It creates 21st century green jobs, and that's the direction we need to move in here in Connecticut.
Thank you. Ms. Healy?
Yep. So what happened this summer when it came to the power outages and the optimum outages and all that was clearly terrible. I mean, I was out of power for 8 days, and there was a heat wave. People were really struggling and suffering. When it came to the Grid Act, there were a lot of good things in there, I believe, as long as the costs are not pushed down to customers. As Ryan had mentioned, we do have the highest rates in the country. I believe that consumers should have an advocate at PURA. It needs to be independent. They need to be transparent and accountable to us, the consumer. Overall, I think utilities are quite complicated. There's no easy way to legislate this. But we saw from the other side of the state, there was a company called United Illuminated, which was a local company, and they were able to get people back online much quicker than we were over here with an outside company. Regarding the environment, we all have to do our part. Obviously, this is our planet. We only get one, and we need some really good strategies. I would support any initiatives that are good for our economy and for the future of our environment here. Some things that I prefer or have worked on personally were installation of solar panels at our local library, which was a very good investment, and we have utility savings with costs, and it also extended our roof life.
Thank you. Anything to add, Mr. Haskell?
No, I'm okay.
Okay, Ms. Healy, you have 30 seconds if you wish to add. If not, we'll go to another
I'm good.
question.
Yep.
Okay. The next question will go actually first to you, Ms. Healy, and it is, the Affordable Care Act is in litigation right now before the Supreme Court. What are your legislative priorities for health care coverage in Connecticut, depending on the outcome
Depending on the outcome.
of the lawsuit?
Right. So obviously, if it stays in place, there would be no need to do any legislating here in Connecticut. If it is eliminated, I would think that we would need to consider some alternatives for people that would potentially lose their coverage. In light of COVID and people losing their jobs, I guess if they can't afford COBRA, they may potentially be able to buy into be able to qualify for the Husky program that we offer here in Connecticut. We also, actually in my career, I audited AmeriCares. They have clinics all through the state if healthcare is unaffordable. Overall, as a nation, healthcare in America is very expensive, and we need to address both sides of the issue when it comes to the healthcare costs and healthcare insurance.
Thank you. Mr. Haskell?
Yeah, well, let's be very clear. Given the fact that it is overwhelmingly likely that Amy Coney Barrett will be confirmed as a justice on the Supreme Court, there will no longer be protections for individuals with pre-existing conditions. We're fortunate that in Connecticut, We've passed statutory language to protect individuals with pre-existing conditions, but statutory language is changed in the state Senate each and every day. So when you go to the polls this year, if you are a woman who previously could have been charged more for health care before the Affordable Care Act, if you are a senior who could have been charged more for your health care before the Affordable Care Act, be sure to look for specificity in your candidates as to who is going to stand up for protections for those with pre-existing conditions. But we've got to go one step further. Look, when I visit businesses, especially small businesses here in Fairfield County, they tell me that the biggest cost increase that they're facing is health care. They want access to a public option, something that Washington couldn't get done when they passed the Affordable Care Act. It would be good for private plans and public plans to introduce that competition into the market, to allow individuals who work for small businesses. By the way, there are 700,000 people in Connecticut who work for small businesses, and the majority of those businesses cannot afford to offer health care. Allowing them to buy into the state's health care plan, it's not just good for the state to have more healthy people buying in, it's also so critical to our economy, to allow individuals who work for small businesses and nonprofits to buy in. There's so much more to talk about around health care. When we talk about health care, we can't ignore the fact that reproductive health care is health care. And tragically, that is also on the ballot this year, given the fact that a supermajority of conservative justices would undermine a woman's right to choose.
Thank you very much. Ms. Healy, do you wish to say something else? on
Sure.
healthcare?
I would
30
just
seconds.
add that I would support pre-existing conditions being guaranteed. I do not believe that women's reproductive rights are on the table here in Connecticut, as they are protected. And they are also available, through the Connecticut plans that are offered. So no need to discuss it.
All right, Mr. Haskell, 30 seconds.
Well, I'd just say there's certainly a need to discuss it. It's true in Connecticut we've codified Roe v. Wade. Again, state statutes are changed every day, and I go to work in Hartford every day with a whole bunch of legislators who don't support a woman's right to choose. So again, look for specificity out of your candidates. But it goes beyond that. It goes towards crisis pregnancy centers, which falsely advertise towards pregnant women. Planned Parenthood and I worked together on legislation over the last session to make sure that they couldn't falsely advertise. There's a lot more to talk about beyond just a woman's right to choose when it comes to reproductive health care.
Thank you. Mr. Fazio, same question to you. Would you like me to reread it?
No, it's okay.
All right.
I spoke to a voter in Stamford the other day. He's a small business owner. He has 2 kids and a wife, and he has a pre-existing condition. He's forced to pay out of pocket $45,000 per year before his health insurance kicks in. That's with the protections of the federal government. That's with the protections of the state government. So we need to protect people under law with pre-existing conditions, but the status quo is not good enough. The status quo in Connecticut and at the federal level is not serving the middle class and the working poor sufficiently. So my plans and principles for healthcare are basically threefold. Protect people with pre-existing conditions in the statutes, provide more choice and competition in health insurance, and create more services and accessibility for healthcare itself. We need to change and improve regulations for healthcare, including eliminating certificate of need laws, which basically require a permission slip from the state government to provide more healthcare access, beds, and so on. And we also need to expand telemedicine, scope of practice laws, and so on and so forth in order to reduce costs. The biggest problem in healthcare in this country, as Kim alluded to, is cost. And the status quo of heavy-handed government, which is being defended on the dais tonight, will only make it more difficult for people to access high-quality health care and afford it.
Thank you. Ms. Kasser?
Thank you. Look, if we've learned anything from this pandemic, it's that public health is a priority, and we can't have a healthy economy without a healthy population. Before the ACA, people with pre-existing conditions could be denied insurance or charged astronomical rates. Women were charged more, and seniors were charged 5 times as much. And if you were pregnant, you couldn't even get insurance. The ACA changed that, and repealing it, which my opponent supports, will put us back in that nightmare. Millions of our most vulnerable will lose insurance, and again, seniors and women and anyone with a pre-existing condition, which now includes COVID, will be charged higher rates. So look, Ryan wants the Affordable Care Act appealed. He says you don't have a right to health care. And he says that young people should not subsidize the cost of care for others. Ryan, that's how insurance works. A larger pool of healthy people lowers the cost for everyone else. And you may not yet understand the impact that repealing this law will have, but for anyone over 50, it can mean the difference between solvency and bankruptcy, the difference between life and death. And it's not a question of if, it's a question of when this Supreme Court strikes down the ACA, it will be critical to defend these rights at the state level. That's why I support a public option, and I proposed a public option for small businesses, SB 69, and I will keep fighting for affordable health care for all.
Thank you, Mr. Fazio. You want to add?
Yes. So the choice is clear. My opponent is a vehement defender of the status quo in Connecticut, where Democrats have had complete control of the state government for 12 years. And if you're a single mom making 70 grand a year with one kid and you buy health insurance on the individual market, it will cost you $17,000 out of pocket before your insurance kicks in. That is inaccessibility. That is prohibitively expensive. That is not fair to the middle class in this state. So the status quo is clearly failing our people.
I'm sorry, is that time? Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Ms. Kasser.
Yeah, well, Ryan, you can't have it both ways. You can't say that the status quo has failed and then blame me when I wasn't the status quo. I'm the first Democrat to represent this district, and in fact, it was your Republican predecessor who sat there for many years. So, but the big problem is that you profess to care about single moms and women, and it's just all a false narrative. If you actually cared about women's health, single moms, or anyone struggling financially, you would be for the ACA.
Thank you very much. We're going to leave healthcare and go to another question. And Mr. Haskell, you'll be first this time. Last spring, a school regionalization bill was proposed, and now a bill has been raised regarding affordable housing. What do you think should be the state's role regarding school regionalization and planning and zoning of affordable housing in local municipalities? Dual question.
Thank you for the question. I'm so happy to have this opportunity to clear up misinformation that I see on social media. I oppose school regionalization. Senator Kasser, Representative Dathan, and I, we released a statement on the very same day that it was proposed. That didn't just mean standing up to members of our own party. It meant standing up to the leaders of our own party. We testified against it. We came back to this room and had town halls answering constituent questions about it. And most importantly, look at the results. We made sure that it never received a vote in the Senate. Now, you shouldn't just vote for candidates who tell you what they're against. There's a lot of that this campaign cycle. But since I have an opportunity to answer the question, I want to also tell you what I'm for. I think that we need to take a close look at computer science curricula because too many businesses tell us that students aren't prepared for a 21st century economy. I think that we need to invest in more teachers of color because right now less than 7% of Connecticut teachers are people of color. I think that we need to invest now in our school system so that students can get back to school safely because 5,000 students haven't even signed into school yet because they're at home with circumstances that don't permit online learning. I've only got 30 seconds left, and of course I got to answer the zoning proposal. Once again, I believe in local control. One side of the aisle is trying to convince you that it's either local control or you support affordable housing. You can do both. You can believe that we need to make this community more affordable for seniors, for single parents, for recent graduates, and also believe that the best folks to make New Canaan more affordable are New Canaan officials themselves. The state takeover isn't necessary, and it's not either or.
Thank you very much, Ms. Haskell.
No, I'm
Ms.
Healy.
Healy, sorry.
A lot of H's up here.
I don't read my own writing.
So, yeah, I support local control of education and zoning, and probably most things. Believe it's definitely better than coming as directives from legislators in Hartford. You know, we choose to where we want to live and where we want to send our kids, and those decisions need to be kept local. With affordable housing, we should also be able to make those choices locally and use our planning and zoning and our housing authorities to lay out those plans in the best areas that we have in our towns and do it in a way that doesn't overwhelm our schools, our water sources, our roads. Going back to education, if the purpose of the school regionalization bill was to save money, it clearly, has been proven in lots of data that wouldn't be the case. And the way to improve educational outcomes is to actually desegregate or decentralize school systems and make them smaller into community schools, where parents have access to the administration and to their teachers in a more local manner. Unfortunately, you mentioned the two bills, and there was a third bill that you don't seem to address. So I guess that would be a question that I've been asked a lot, where you stand on that bill.
All right, Mr. Haskell, you have 30 seconds if you wish to add something.
I'd be happy to. I've been very clear. I oppose school regionalization, any and all attempts. There was a governor's bill. He wanted to wade into the issue from a cost savings perspective. I asked him to come down to the 26th district, meet with the leaders of my community, Democrats and Republicans, hear from them. He had a productive meeting. I think we effectively convinced him it wasn't a good idea. He came out to the podium and he said, I've had a lot of input on this bill. I think we need to do more carrots than sticks. I've had some input from Will Haskell. All of a sudden, they're running around saying it's that Lamont-Haskell bill. How ridiculous.
The Democrats' party, it seemed like every bad idea that was ever had came up that January and February. You had school regionalization, you had trying to push teacher pensions down onto our towns, and a whole host of other things. So I just think that we need a balance at the table.
Thank you. All right, back to 36. Ms. Kasser? Do you wish me to read the question again?
No, I've got it. Thank you so much. So as Senator Haskell said, we both have been steadfast and clear in our commitment of opposing forced regionalization of schools or zoning. And it's precisely because we are members of the majority party that when we stood up on day one and spoke out publicly against this idea, which came from our party leader, the Senate Majority Leader, that we were able to push back on this bad idea and not let it gain traction. So that right there is the benefit of having Democrats who represent New Canaan and share your values and share your commitment to local control in Hartford. Now you may call that status quo, Ryan. I call that effective leadership. And now when it comes to zoning and housing, I am happy to say that I have met with your chairman of the New Canaan Planning and Zoning Commission, John Goodwin, wonderful guy, and assured him that we're going to keep local control, but we also share a vision of building on the tradition, that great tradition that New Canaan already has of affordable housing. And we had a wonderful meeting actually about a year ago with the New Canaan Housing Authority and the Commissioner of Housing at New Canaan Parish to celebrate a new renovation of that affordable housing unit, which is only possible because of state funding and a partnership with the state. That's what we facilitate.
Thank you. Mr. Fazio?
Local control of schools and of planning and zoning are absolutely mandatory in my book. I will be a vehement defender of them in the state Senate. The political realities of these two fraught issues are very clear. If Democrats maintain 60% majorities in the state Senate and in the state House of Representatives, there will have been zero political consequences to Bob Duff and Martin Looney, who run the Democratic State Senate and are in favor of school regionalization and more state control of zoning and planning. And as a consequence, they will go forward with pushing their bills through the legislature next year. My opponent, as well as the other freshman senator on the dais tonight, support the leadership of Bob Duff and Martin Looney, and in doing so, give them constitutional powers to run the state Senate, just like the Speaker of the House runs the state House of Representatives. So, if they are able to retain their seats and Democrats are able to retain 60% majorities in both houses, there is still a good deal of probability that both local control of schools and of zoning will be in jeopardy. So this, again, is a false flag. The cost savings argument is a false flag. It always has been. There's only a couple tens of millions of dollars that are due to be saved. We need to protect something that is of significant importance to the people of New Canaan, and that's local control.
Thank you. Ms. Kasser, do you wish to add something?
Thank you. Look, we hear these false narratives and fear-mongering all day long at the federal level, at the state level. It is vital that voters elect people who share their values. and who fight for them. And that is exactly what we've done. And again, Ryan, you are mistaken, because I did not support my party leaders. And in fact, I didn't support them for this reason. And I told them so privately as well as publicly. So Marty Looney and Bob Duff are great guys, and I have a lot of respect for them, but they can't push things forward and over us.
Thank you very much, Mr. Fazio. Oh, something else?
You did not, can I ask my opponent if you did not support either man for their positions in leadership, or are you saying?
Correct.
You didn't? And is there any public statements showing that over the past 2 years?
That doesn't happen publicly.
Oh, so you have no public statements on the record showing that you oppose their
Why don't
leadership?
you ask them?
I could verify.
Thank you.
It's convenient. Very convenient.
All right.
I think the voters have a right to know.
All right, we're going to another question, which will go to Mr. Fazio first. Discussions about racial justice and poverty are taking place across the country, state, and in New Canaan. How do you view racial justice and poverty levels in Fairfield County, and what policy areas do you feel will need legislative action, if any?
This is a very important question. My most fundamental political belief is that we're all created equal in the image of a loving God, and therefore government exists to protect us all equally under the law. That is a absolutely inviolable principle. But in Connecticut, there's been a total diminishment of opportunity and hope for people who are struggling to get by. Over the last 30 years, while Democrats had 28 years of complete legislative control, the poverty rate in the state of Connecticut has gone up 47%, while it went down significantly all across the country. That's because it's been made more difficult to create jobs, to invest in our community, and to work in Connecticut by the people in state leadership. Years after years of tax increases and more regulatory power for the bureaucrats in the state government. It's time for a change. We need to encourage work and job creation and investment in our community. So people want to move here. So there's opportunity for people who are struggling to get by, people who are in some of our inner cities in this state where there hasn't been a modicum of economic opportunity in many years. We can do better. The state government has not done a good job of providing opportunity and justice for all as is.
Thank you, Ms. Kasser.
Sorry, could you repeat the question? Thank
Yes,
you.
certainly. Discussions about racial justice and poverty are taking place across the country, state, and in New Canaan. How do you view racial justice and poverty levels in Fairfield County, and what policy areas do you feel will need legislative action, if any?
Thank you. So I want to start by saying I believe that Black lives matter. I believe we are all created equal, but I know that we are not treated equally. So we need to do something to actually end systemic racism. And it's not enough to use words and say that you're against racism. It's only our actions that speak. We have done quite a bit, and there is so much more to do to address poverty and racial justice. I'm very proud that we passed the first Paid Family Medical Leave Act in our state, which will lift women out of poverty and not allow people to choose between their jobs and caring for their family member. We also passed the minimum wage, which again will lift women out of poverty, and particularly minority women. 70% who are in poverty will come out because they'll be paid a fair wage. There are many issues that plague our cities in Fairfield County and particularly impact minorities and minority women. And I'm committed to addressing all of them. One thing that I have done and I hope to pass is a bill that addresses domestic violence. It's called Jennifer's Law, in honor of Jennifer Dulos, but also thousands of other victims of domestic violence. And it ensures that our law believes women when they are afraid, and it protects them. But look, the real causes of poverty,
Okay.
I could go on.
All right, Mr. Fazio, do you have anything to say?
I'm good.
To add?
No, thanks.
All right, Ms. Kasser? You have your 30-second if you desire.
Yeah, I have a lot more to say on this issue because it's an issue that really doesn't get enough attention. And I represent Stanford, and Stanford has a very diverse population, and Stanford does have poverty. And in fact, Greenwich has poverty too. This is something that people are not aware of. 20% of the population in Greenwich lives just one paycheck away from poverty. So what people deserve is education, opportunity, and support when they need it. Everybody wants to be self-sufficient. Everybody wants the right to be dignified and to support their family. We have a lot more work to do in terms of economic development and ensuring opportunity for all.
Thank you. Ms. Healy?
Yes. So,
Racial justice and poverty.
yeah, I'm just trying to frame my thoughts.
Right,
You know,
no, no.
this summer obviously brought to light this issue in a huge way with the murder of George Floyd, the passing of the police bill, all the protests, the peace marches, the rioting. I mean, it compounded with COVID. You know, it just feels like we're at the brink of something. My feeling is that everyone deserves to be treated with kindness and respect. You know, that their lives should be able to be, you know, they should be able to live their lives as they wish to reach their fullest potential. My stepmother actually is a person of color. She is married to my father, who's a white man. They live in the town I grew up in. You know, they faced racism as a couple and her individually a lot. And I've had to, you know, listen to my father talk about it. And, you know, there is no easy answer. I think that racism is learned at home. We can't legislate that. So the way I would approach it if I was elected was through education and opportunity with jobs. Obviously, with Connecticut and the financial state that it's in, the only way to really address any of these things is to strengthen our economy, and I have the background and skills that can help that get done. Thanks.
Thank you. Mr. Haskell?
I guess where we differ is I think we can legislate about it. I think that we can address the structural inequalities. You take a 10-minute drive on I-95 and you'll cross a $100,000 difference in median income. Let that sink in. That's astonishing. A $100,000 difference in median income. That's not just immoral, it's bad economic policy that too many folks can't afford to buy groceries, can't afford to put food on the table or gas in their car. That's why I worked so hard with Senator Kasser to pass the $15 minimum wage, which is going to give 330,000 people, the majority of whom are women, a significant pay increase this year, and actually pay increases over the next 4 years. It's not just, though, about increasing the minimum wage. We also need to recognize that when we talk about racial justice and poverty, we have to address the epidemic of gun violence, which is especially hurting our urban communities right now. That's why I'm really proud to be endorsed by Connecticut Against Gun Violence. For that matter, I'm proud to have an F from the NRA, and I'm a believer that Connecticut has not gone far enough in standing up to the NRA and passing gun laws that are going to save lives. And finally, we've got a criminal justice system that is fundamentally broken, that treats people differently according to the color of their skin. And we spend so much money on it. We spend more money on our carceral system than we do our public health system. That is beyond criminal, and I've visited incarceration facilities across the state of Connecticut. It's far too many black and brown bodies who are there awaiting trial, very often simply because they can't pay bail. There's a lot of legislating to be done in this area.
Thank you. Ms. Healy, do you wish to add?
Yeah, just quickly. So I'm not sure if I've already said my father's a retired police officer, so I was personally upset with the police accountability bill. I also believe that it directly hurts people of color in our inner cities, as it is going to basically, you know, we will call it defund the police, though we know that really isn't true. The other thing I should say is that the minimum wage should have been at least deferred at least 1 year, because our small businesses are hurting and they are not able to hire people, which indirectly affects those lower income people.
Mr. Haskell?
I guess I'll use my 30 seconds to say, why will you call it defunding the police if you just said that's not what it does? It allocates millions of dollars in funding for police departments to afford body cameras and dashboard cameras. It implements implicit bias training, something that we all should do. It imposes transparency over an officer's record so he or she can't hop from department to department. We've got major issues in policing in Connecticut and across the country, but don't take my word for it. Take the word of the Black and Puerto Rican Caucus, who said, we want this bill. You know, there were things in there that perhaps weren't perfect, but it moves us in the right direction, in my belief, and most importantly, in theirs.
Okay, next question will go to Ms. Kasser first. And it is, a significant portion of Connecticut's budget goes to debt service and salary pension obligations and benefits for public union employees. What could the legislature do to control these costs and put Connecticut's cost structure more in line with neighboring states?
Thank you. This is an important issue. It's one that I researched intensively in 2018 because I knew there had to be a better solution than what had been done in the past, which was essentially nothing. And sure enough, there is a proven solution. And I worked with pension experts from Harvard, and it's a solution called the Shared Risk Pension Plan. It's what Gina Raimondo, the governor of Rhode Island, implemented there. It is a structural change to the state employee pension plan. Now, it does require a commitment from leadership. It does require political will to negotiate and to move forward, but I believe it can be done. But look, I have on principle voted against most of the state employee contracts because they raised state spending at a time when we hadn't yet fully addressed this issue and some of our other issues, and we hadn't seized opportunities for new revenue, which is why I voted against the state budget. But my opponents has been saying that people should be just moved to a 401k, because that's what they do in the private sector. Well, it's also what puts all of the onus on employees, all the onus for market volatility. And the reason that people take jobs in the state police and elsewhere, and the firefighters that I just spoke to, is because they are insured a pension.
Thank you very much, Mr. Fazio.
I did not vehemently endorse 401ks for state employees, but it's interesting that my opponent's kind of contradicting herself by saying that she's for shared risk, which is basically 401ks, but I guess it's just a different type of shared risk. So shared risk is a good idea, but the problem with our budget crisis is the overall cost. It's not just a matter of risk. It's that state employees in Connecticut receive pensions and health benefits that are basically twice as expensive as are normal in the private sector for similar employees. We need to make state employee benefits fair and more in line with private sector wages. Even if they're still above private sector benefits, we need to make them closer to fair in order to prevent mass layoffs and haircuts in the future. This is the most important public policy issue facing our state. It's the reason your taxes keep going up year after year. It's the reason that people have been leaving our state for many, many years. Again, there needs to be change. My opponent can't have it both ways, where she says, I am against this, but I also have a seat at the table. I'm influential. There were 12 state budgets, state employee contracts that raised state employee pay in the last term. My opponent opposed some of them, but she was in favor of others. She was silent when state employees in July of this year received a 5.5% pay increase during the worst unemployment that we've had since the Great Recession. We need to focus and reform the benefits for state employees in order to raise the middle class in the state.
Thank you. Ms. Kasser, do you wish to add something?
Yes, I do. I am never silent. Let me just say that contract that my opponent just referred to was negotiated long before I ever arrived in Hartford. So, and look, and also the shared risk plan is not a 401k. Do your homework, Ryan. It's shared risk because employer-employee share risk. Seems like you get most of your information from the Yankee Institute, which we all know is right-wing rhetoric. So it's important that you really get your information from appropriate sources.
Okay, Mr. Fazio, anything else to add?
Yeah, so it's just a matter of conceptual difference between a 401k and shared risk. They're both on the table. But my opponent is not often silent, but she was silent for 4 months between the time that the recession hit and when the state employee benefit raise 5.5% went into effect on July 1st. She should have spoken out against it. The governor had plenary powers, emergency powers, in order to stop it.
Okay, thank you very much. Mr. Haskell.
Look, it took us decades to get into this fiscal mess, and it's probably going to take some time for Connecticut to get out of it. I'd love to sit up here and offer a silver bullet, but anyone who does so probably isn't telling you the full story. There's a lot of bad news, but let's just talk for 1 second about a little bit of good news. Connecticut is a $30 million budget surplus this year, and we've got $3.1 billion in the rainy day fund. That's keeping the lights on in this state when income tax revenue and sales tax revenue drop so precipitously. That rainy day fund is there at the $3.1 billion level because when some of our colleagues in Hartford stood up and said, hey, you know, we don't think that an economic recession lies around the corner. Let's take 2/3 out of it to spend on transportation improvements. God knows, nobody wants transportation improvements more than I do. But we thought it was a bad idea. Senator Kasser and I said, you know what? Let's keep the money in the rainy day fund in case there's an economic downturn. And that has proved so critical in providing Connecticut with a state of fiscal stability during this very uncertain time. You know, the good news also is that we've stopped offering those expensive Tier 1 pension contracts that were negotiated. By the way, Democratic governors, Republican governors, a lot of folks share the blame here. But these days, if you sign up to work for the state government, you're going to get a Tier 4 pension. It's not a 401k that you'd see in the private sector, but it is a 403b, the public sector equivalent. Most importantly, we are saving for those pensions fully in our contract to make sure that they are funded and that the next generation does not inherit this mess. It's tremendously unfair that for many, many years, legislators and governors alike made expensive promises and didn't put a penny forward. We're not making that mistake again.
Thank you. Ms. Healy?
Yes, so like a few people have said here already, it's taken us a long time to get into this, but you also need to recognize who's been in charge for all those years, and they have not addressed it. We have over $70 billion in unfunded liabilities, the 48th worst in the USA. 40 other states have made big reforms to improve theirs. Like was said, there is no magic bullet, but years of ignoring it and have caused us to be in this situation. Warren Buffett says that no company should come to Connecticut unless we get our unfunded pension liabilities in order. What do we need to do? It is going to take a lot of work. I actually have been working with an actuary who talks for hours and hours and hours about a solution. She claims it can be done, and we know it can be done. It is not going to be easy, like has been said. One of the issues is we need to cut our connections with special interests because they're the ones that have allowed us to not fund the pension liabilities over these years. They have made deals, backroom deals, maybe in public deals, I can't really say, but they need to stop, and we need to address it immediately for the sake of our state. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Haskell. Anything to add?
Yeah, I'd love to add. I just don't understand why we again and again pretend that Governor Rell and Governor Wecker don't exist. Democrats and Republicans share the blame for this, but more importantly, forward-looking, voters are facing a critical choice on November 3rd, and in order to do so, I think they deserve specificity. I have not heard specifics from my opponent about which departments she wants to privatize, about which line items in the budget she wants to cut. Here are my specifics. I wrote a new law to eliminate wasteful spending in the state government. Alex and I helped pass a tax credit to make the state more affordable to recent graduates, and we supported a phase out of the Social Security tax. Those are specifics.
Ms. Healy, anything to add?
I have never mentioned spending cuts. We were talking about pensions. If we were going to talk about cuts, we certainly can improve the spending by just even implementing the efficiencies that have been provided by the accountants. I'm an accountant. I'm a CPA. I clearly am better suited for a job that requires all these kinds of experience.
All right, thank you very much. This will be the last question before we go to closing statements, and it will go to Ms. Healy first. Even though public transportation usage has declined post-COVID, it will continue to be an important element of our town and state's economic health. Connecticut recently received a $400,000 federal grant to study transportation funding. What transportation options or improvements do you foresee, and what are the potential sources of funding for those improvements?
That's a great question. Clearly, infrastructure is crucial to our to improving our economy here in Connecticut. I myself have commuted by train and on 95 and all of our other highways. The solution needs to be bipartisan, for sure. We need a voice at the table. I believe that public-private partnerships would be the best option for Connecticut. So in order for Connecticut to be a state where residents and companies want to launch or relocate to, we must address our transportation infrastructure if we want to turn our state around. We need to stop diverting funds away from the transportation lockbox. A recent review of the funding from just last year diverted the car sales tax away from the fund for yet another year. We need to address all forms of our infrastructure, our roads, our bridges, our trains. We need to do a review of all of our different transportation types and stop funding underused services and lines. I also think that we need to move the DOT, Department of Salaries and Benefits, out of the Special Transportation Fund and move them to the General Fund. And that would leave a lot more money in the Special Transportation Fund. I think we need to address special interest groups that keep our roads the most expensive in our country per mile, and we need to address prevailing wage.
All right, Mr. Haskell?
Yeah, on my desk in the State Senate, I keep a timetable from 1970, a Metro North timetable. I show anyone who's willing to look that the train has gotten slower since then, not faster. By every metric, we are moving in the wrong direction. And it's not just our public transportation. We've got more than 350 structurally deficient bridges. Businesses tell us again and again they don't want to locate in Connecticut if they can't get their employees to and from work efficiently. Look, pensions are complicated. I don't think this one is. Across the Northeast, Democratic states, Republican states, they've imposed user fees as the most reliable way to fund infrastructure improvements. And in fact, Connecticut is a pass-through state strategically located between Boston and Manhattan. Why is it that we offer trucking companies and out-of-state drivers a free ride? It doesn't make us uniquely advantaged not to have tolls. It makes us uniquely disadvantaged because we, as taxpayers, bear the sole responsibility of funding our infrastructure. And for many years, we've just decided not to do it. That's why the Transportation Fund is so rapidly approaching insolvency, and it's why our infrastructure is stuck really in the 19th century. Senator Kasser and I supported the Connecticut 2030 plan. It would have brought billions of dollars of investments. It would have asked out-of-state drivers and trucking companies to pick up the tab. Connecticut residents would be asked to pay too. I'll be transparent, but of course, they were offered a discount, which you can do in 21st century tolls. Commuters were offered an additional discount. My constituents pay tolls in so many other states. They are sick of giving those out-of-state drivers and trucking companies a free ride through Connecticut.
Thank you. Ms. Healy, anything to add?
So I would just add that, we as Connecticut residents pay the second highest in taxation in the country. We pay enough. End of story. We don't need tolls. We need to just clean up our act. I've already mentioned a whole bunch of things that would save us money in the Special Transportation Fund, and we could fund our infrastructure properly if we did that.
All right, Mr. Haskell, last word on this?
Yeah, I'll just add briefly that, there's been a lot of talk about special interests tonight. I promise you, nobody was happier in Hartford when tolls were defeated during this past session than the trucking lobby, because trucks have a disproportionate wear and tear on our infrastructure. They pay a little bit, but they don't pay nearly as much into Connecticut as they pay elsewhere. And if you don't believe me, look, the next time you're driving on 95 or on the Merritt, look at how many out-of-state plates are passing through. And then when you cross into the next state, watch as they start to contribute into that state's infrastructure. If it drives you half as crazy as it drives me, I imagine you're going to support a common sense user fee.
Mr. Fazio?
Will is absolutely right that over many years the trains have gotten slower and the roads have gotten worse. But they've gotten worse while the state of Connecticut has spent the third most of any state in the entire country on transportation. We do not have a revenue problem in this state. Our people are taxed and tolled and feed too much already. We have a spending problem. The Reason Foundation said that Connecticut spends the most administratively on its roads of any state in the country. The bureaucracy doesn't work. So my plan calls for 3 steps. First, eliminate or improve rules that make construction and infrastructure spending inefficient in our state. Project labor agreements increase the cost of construction 20 to 30% in Connecticut. We need an audit of the Department of Transportation for waste. We shouldn't give it more money until we figure out why it's spending the money that we currently give it so poorly. Finally, we need to prioritize high-value investments in Lower Fairfield County, like Metro North and 95. The 2030 plan that was referenced continues to spend hundreds of millions of dollars on the Hartford train line, which subsidizes every rider in excess of $150 per ride. We need to focus our resources on the type of transportation and infrastructure that's most valuable to our state, which is down in this district.
Ms. Kasser?
Thank you. Well, as chair of the Banking Committee and vice chair of the Transportation Committee, I have a unique position to shape our infrastructure policy, and it is my priority because modernizing our roads, bridges, and rails is what we need to do to make Connecticut a pro-business state, a place where people and businesses want to move permanently. And I introduced common sense legislation to fix the problems that we have. A new revenue source, tolls, that is not your taxes. In fact, it would be half the bill if instead of your taxes, but also an infrastructure bank to harness billions from investors and use public-private partnerships. This is the responsible way to finance infrastructure projects. And even the author of the Reason Report, the roundly refuted Reason Report that my opponent cites, said that his research has been twisted because actually the conclusion that he draws from the expense that he cites in his report is that Connecticut needs tolls, more lanes on I-95, and public-private partnerships, exactly what I proposed. But let's look at Ryan's plan. So first of all, his numbers are way off. He says Connecticut is in the top 3 in spending. It's not even in the top 10 of states. And also, his 3-point plan, the audit of the Department of Transportation is already being done. So that leaves his one new idea, which is to cut costs by cutting quality and safety.
Thank you very much. Mr. Fazio, do you wish to add anything?
My numbers are not off. I know where they come from. The number that I cited at first, that Connecticut spends the 3rd most of any state per capita on transportation, is from the National Association of State Budget Offices. It takes the spending and the budgets from every state in the country and compares them one to another. Connecticut is spending the 3rd most on transportation as is. Changing the rules and the regulations around our spending, all the money that we send to Hartford as is the best answer. You can't give more power to bureaucrats when they're failing with the money and power we're sending them already.
Thank you. Ms. Kasser, last word on transportation?
So even if you like his idea of cutting quality and safety standards, that still would not achieve the billions we need to upgrade our roads and rails. But really, Ryan, skimping on safety, I mean, how many lives are you willing to risk to save a few bucks? My opponent says we have a spending problem. We have a political problem. The Republican Party says no to every common sense, fiscally responsible solution. That's called obstruction.
Thank you. I am told by the organizer we have time for one more question before closing statements, and it goes to you, Mr. Haskell. There are many factors to make a state attractive to businesses: abundant talent pool, taxes, transportation, regulations. What ideas do you have to attract businesses that will put down roots and stay in Connecticut past COVID?
I am so glad that we were able to get this question in before the end. I serve as the Senate Chairman of the Higher Education Committee, and I've been laser focused on the problem of young people who earn their degree in Connecticut and then decide to leave once they're ready to start their career or buy their first home or start their small business. It's a weird problem when you visit small businesses again and again, or large companies. Look at GE. You know, they went to Massachusetts, as many say, when, if you look at the letter that their CEO released, he said Connecticut couldn't provide a young, diverse, tech-savvy workforce. Why is that? We've got some of the best K-12 schools in the country. We've got some of the best colleges and universities in the country, from Yale to Wesleyan to Conn College to UConn to Norwalk Community College. Too many of those students are picking up and leaving. And it's because we're not a state that's affordable to young people. I know that firsthand. We've got to invest in public transportation. We've got to make sure we've had workforce housing. We talked about both those issues tonight. But we haven't talked about the student loan crisis. Connecticut is the highest student loan debt per capita of any state in the country. Under Senator Kasser's leadership in the Banking Committee, I helped work on a tax credit that essentially says to businesses, if you help to pay off the student loan debt of your employees, we will give you a break on your corporate taxes. It was bipartisan, signed into law by the governor, because not only did it make Connecticut more affordable to businesses, it helped young people afford to stay here. That's what we've got to do in order to make sure that we are ready to tackle the challenges of a 21st century economy. We're educating students. Now we just have to keep them here.
Thank you. Ms. Healy?
So COVID-19 obviously has changed the dynamic of just about every aspect of our lives. With the closure of companies, offices throughout the tri-state area, we've been given the opportunity for people to work from home or to work close to home instead of commuting say to New York City from this area anyway. You know, I keep hearing that a lot of companies intend on keeping their employees working outside of the metro areas for the foreseeable future. So I think we need to harness this opportunity. You know, we need to get, unfortunately, our fiscal house in order before they're going to be willing to put down roots here for the long term. We need to work on our tax rates and our overall spending. And I think if we do that, there'll be no reason why they wouldn't want to live in our state. I mean, we provide the most beautiful scenery. We have great options for, you know, great schools. We have an airport. We have the sea. We have the mountains. I mean, Connecticut is a wonderful place. I think if we get our economy back on track and we make ourselves really attractive to the surrounding states by lowering our tax rates, that companies will want to come here and it'll make it for a better future for all of us.
Thank you. Mr. Haskell, do you wish to add anything?
Yeah, you know, I've been going door to door a lot because it's campaign season, and I meet so many brand new families in New Canaan this afternoon. I met a family who moved in yesterday, and I always ask what brings them to this community. They say it's the high quality of our public schools, which is something I'm dedicated to protecting and advancing. It's a little bit of open space, and of course, it's an economic opportunity. So now investing not just in corporate bailouts that don't work, but in opportunities for small businesses to make the state affordable. That's why I was so proud to help eliminate the business entity tax, a pesky fine that sends the wrong signal to entrepreneurs.
Thank you. Ms. Healy, do you wish to add anything?
I would just say that if I'm elected, I will guarantee that I will not receive an F from the CBIA or the NFIB, which encourages businesses and the business environment in Connecticut.
All right. Ms. Kasser, do you?
Yes, thank you. But growing our economy has been and continues to be my priority, and I've demonstrated that by opposing new taxes, finding new revenue sources that are not your taxes, and embracing innovation to grow the economy. We need to invest in our infrastructure, which includes schools and power grids, as well as our roads and rails. And as Senator Haskell mentioned, as chair of the Banking Committee, I introduced a bill which he helped to make law, which became the first law in Connecticut to lower student loan debt. It also is a win-win for businesses because it gives Connecticut companies a tax break for doing the right thing and helping to pay down their employee debt. But look, I talk to businesses every day, and during the pandemic, as banking chair, I made sure that things like the PPP loans that were being distributed by banks, federal money coming through our Connecticut banks, were distributed to the small businesses that needed them most. That is the kind of thing that we need to do to make sure that small businesses, which really are the backbone of our economy, can thrive in our state. But we are really facing significant fiscal challenges. But in order to meet these challenges, we need honesty and fiscal responsibility, which doesn't mean making empty promises and pretending there isn't a problem. It also does not mean slashing billions in revenue from our state and then somehow saying we can spend more on transportation.
Thank you. Mr. Fazio?
We can't have fiscal irresponsibility, and we can't have empty promises, which is why it's unacceptable to me that my opponent in her last campaign ran on cutting taxes for all families, but voted to raise them in SB 1 by $650 on the average family in this district. She promised to be fiscally responsible, but she also received an F from the small business watchdog in Connecticut, the CBIA. Connecticut can't keep making the same mistakes it has for many, many years. The second highest taxes in the country, the fifth highest regulatory burden, the highest debt and unfunded liability in the entire country. We need a change of direction. So my plan is threefold for economic growth. First, lower taxes, lower income taxes across the board, and simplify the tax code in order to make to raise enough revenue. We need to provide regulatory reform where every major regulation in the state is scored by the state government in the same way that we score budgetary bills for their cost to taxpayers. Finally, we need to confront the budget crisis. No more, we need to put the state on a debt diet. We need to divest the state of loss-making assets that shouldn't be on its books in the first place, and we need to directly confront and reform the unfunded pension liabilities. The state legislature needs to do it itself. We can create economic growth in the state. We have all the attributes necessary to succeed, except good public policy.
Thank you, Ms. Kasser.
Well, the debt diet you're referring to is already being implemented by our governor, so nice try trying to take that idea. But also, once again, Ryan, your numbers are not telling the truth, because I voted against the state budget, which increased sales tax. And you know that, and you keep saying something that's not true. But if you're referring to the Paid Family Medical Leave Act, that is not a tax. It's an insurance policy that protects women and working families from being fired or losing their paychecks if they have to care for a family member.
Thank you.
I am
Mr.
referring
Fazio?
to
Yes,
I am
go-
referring to the payroll tax that my opponent voted for in SB 1 that will impose a 50 basis point, 0.5% payroll tax on all families starting in January. She promised to cut taxes on all families. Those are her standards I'm holding her to, but she voted to raise her taxes, and they'll go up significantly next year because of that. The debt diet is not enforced because my opponent voted for bonded debt bill 5518 that increased debt levels in the state significantly. Those are fiscally irresponsible measures.
All right, we are now definitely going to closing statements. 2 minutes. Mr. Fazio, you're first.
I'm running for this office because I grew up in this district. I went to the public schools and I returned here to work in renewable energy, to volunteer in inner city schools. I sit on the Greenwich Town government, and I've been an advocate for public policy reforms in our state. I love this state. I love this district. It's my home, and I'll promise to fight for it every single day in our state Senate. We can do better as a state. We have all the attributes necessary to succeed in Connecticut. Natural beauty, a prime location, good people, and strong communities. But our public policy, our state leadership is failing us year after year. Empty promises are not enough. Real change is required in order for us to change Hartford, save Connecticut, and restore hope for the future in our community.
Ms. Kasser.
Thank you. I am proud to be on the ballot with Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, and Jim Himes. I am proud to be a Democrat, but I've also proven that I stand up to party leaders when I disagree with them. I've done exactly what I said I'd do when I was elected. And our state and country are at a crossroads. Our economy and our values are on the ballot. I have fought for both. And the fact is that social progress fuels economic progress. We don't have to choose between them. As the federal government strips away protections of our environment, education, and health care, and when the Supreme Court strips away our rights, state government has to be the firewall. Thousands of people are moving to Connecticut because we've made our state one of the safest during this pandemic, and because of the strides we've made on economic and social issues. We can't afford to go backwards. We have to keep moving forward. That's what I'm committed to doing. That is what my record shows. I have fought for more funding for our schools. I have fought for more funding for our community. My opponent has voted to cut $3 million in public school funding in Greenwich. So you can't have it both ways. You can't cut billions of dollars in revenue and then say that we're going to have a better day tomorrow. We need to invest in our infrastructure and our future.
Thank you, Ms. Healy.
Do we get the
Do they do
rebuttal
the rebuttal?
privilege?
May we finish first, please, and then you can
Okay, great.
have a 30-second rebuttal.
Go.
Okay.
okay.
Do your rebuttals now.
Great. So
30 seconds.
I voted for a budget in Greenwich that increased school funding 1.3% year after year. When all was said and done, there were 0 faculty members cut, there were 0 programming cuts. My opponent, by contrast, tried to shut schools in the fall. She wrote an August 14th letter to the governor, which said shut all schools for the fall, which is against the science. If my opponent got her way, there would be no in-person schooling this fall, which would be to the detriment of all families.
Well, I feel in all fairness, there should be another 30 seconds.
Go ahead.
Thank you. Yes, I've written many letters to the governor and the administration, all asking for more funding and more resources for our schools and our communities so that they could open safely and stay open. And I keep fighting for more resources for our public schools because keeping them safe and open is not just critical to the health and welfare of our students and their families, but also to the recovery of our economy. And I just want to say that the behavior of my opponent and many of his supporters spreading
Okay.
lies about me
Thank
is
you.
Oh,
Thank you.
unacceptable.
Thank you, Ms. Kasser. Ms. Healy?
So thank you all for a great debate tonight. I just wanted to take a few moments to share a few closing thoughts with you. The land of steady habits, Connecticut's nickname, at one time was a state that demonstrated incredible fiscal responsibility, prudent legislation, and strong independent towns. Unfortunately, this is not the case anymore. The fact is, the Democratic Party supermajority has been in power in Connecticut for about 40 years, and the results in this state speak for themselves. We need a balance at the table in Hartford. A two-thirds majority of one-party rule has benefited only special interests and not the businesses and residents of our state. And unfortunately, Connecticut is at the bottom of virtually every economic metric. However, despite all of our challenges, Connecticut has incredible potential. Our state boasts remarkable natural beauty, a strong education system, an inspirational history, and distinct communal spirit. We need a strong advocate in Hartford to retain local control of our schools and maintain our town's authority over our planning and zoning decisions, and a supporter of our police and first responders who will keep our communities safe. I am Kim Healy. I will be the advocate and senator that our district needs, and I'd appreciate your support and your vote.
Thank you. Mr. Haskell.
Well, thank you so much for the league to putting this together. Thank you, of course, to Ms. Healy and all the candidates on stage. I really enjoyed this conversation. New Canaan, 2 years ago, you took a chance on me, and this job has honestly been more rewarding than I ever anticipated. I'm in awe of what we accomplished in our first 2 years. We passed paid family and medical leave so that no person is forced to choose between their family and their career. We opened the door for more students to attend community college without going into debt. We stood up to the NRA and enacted 3 strong gun laws that are going to save lives. But the challenges before us are huge. More than 150,000 people in Connecticut were unemployed as of August. We're facing a $2.1 billion budget deficit, and the price of healthcare is skyrocketing at the very moment that our community needs access to care more than ever. A president once said that there's nothing that's wrong with America that can't be cured by what's right with America. That rings true about this community in this crisis. I know that because I've held 73 town halls, some of them in this very room. I've met with commuters at the train station. I've talked to commuters as I drive up to Hartford. I've talked to constituents as I drive up to Hartford and drive home. I grew up here and I went to some of the best public schools in the country right here in Fairfield County. And I know that this crisis has brought out heroes everywhere you look. Some are quick to dismiss my optimism as being naive, but I and so many others are optimistic because rather than throwing up our hands, we're rolling up our sleeves and we're doing the hard work to make this community better and healthy.
Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you, candidates. Thank you so much for this wonderful exchange of ideas. We appreciate your coming and rolling with our mask constraints. And everyone at home, please remember November 3rd to vote. If you have voting questions, go to lwvnewcanaan.org and also consult our voters guide, our nonpartisan voters guide, where you can learn more about these candidates. Thank you and good night.
Good night.